there was this young driver back then by the name of Darrell Waltrip, and from what I understand, he didn't exactly get along with Cale too well. And if Cale didn't like him, I'm assuming that Cale's team didn't like him. What was the team viewpoint on Darrell Waltrip in the late 1970s?
I can say this here.
You can say it. Let her rip.
He was nothing but a smart ass. I mean,
Darrell?
that's all it was. That's all it was. It was a smart ass.
Yeah.
And it's like, for example, he was supposedly, quote unquote, supposedly the king of Nashville. He was the king of this and the king of every short track. I'm the best there ever was. I mean, if you don't believe me, you can read it right here in the Grand National Scene. He could talk some smack. But because of that, I think he motivated us to make sure he didn't. And the one year, I remember it was the year, I think it was 78. I could be wrong on the year, but I'm pretty sure it was 78 because that's when Herb Nabb had left and he'd gone to work for Harry Ranier, and Lenny Pond was the driver at the time. Lenny went to Nashville, sat on the pole. We sat outside pole. They dropped the green flag. Lenny never led a lap that night. We led 402 or 403 out of a 410 lap race at Nashville. And no Lenny Pond, and definitely no Darrell Waltrip. So we go back the fall, the summer race. Back then, we were pretty close as far as when you went to both races, almost back to back. But we get back there again, everything repeats. We wound up Lenny Pond on the pole. We wound up being outside. We take off this time, and I think we led 408 or 410 out of the 420 laps that you're up there with. My point about the smartass being as Darrell was, we were down in the garage area, and pretty much everybody ran the same cars. You only had a speedway car and a short track car. Well, he said, "You boys can't do that again. We're getting ready to show you something. We got us a brand new piece here, and we're getting ready to put it on you. I mean, just remember that right now." I said, "Okay, fine." We looked up at him, and everybody working on the 11s. So, well, all you got to do is just do it. And he didn't do it again. I mean, he couldn't. Cale, just put a whooping on him. And as I said, him being a smart ass like that, I think motivated us a lot. And, those are the kind of fun times that you can't ever forget because they were so in your face and definitive of how good Cale Yarborough was. A lot of times people ask me, what's the difference between Cale and Darrell? You've worked with both of them. Cale Yarborough had a little favorite saying. He'd tell it to Herb. He'd tell it to Travis and Tim Brewer. Boys, just get it close. I'll make up the difference. I mean, that man, I call him short man, but that son of a gun, he was a bull in a china shop when it came to driving a race car. That thing may have been a beast to handle, but he'd figure out some way to get it up front and be in contention for the win. And there's some days hotter than blue blazes outside, and that's when he liked it the most. You make it hot and slick, and Cale Yarborough was the guy you were going to have to outrun because he figured out a way from staying on that farm down in South Carolina. He was heat-treated and tougher than a pine knot. Darrell on the other side, he was smooth as silk, and he'd make the car do all the work. He was a smart race car driver. He'd work you to death getting the car right so he wouldn't wear himself out, and he'd have something left at the end of the day. Privileged to have worked for both of them because of what I was again able to understand and develop an understanding for what drivers need, and sometimes when they need something it's because they're looking at it at a different perspective and figuring out how to understand drivers' lingo and watching the car and watching what they're doing and try to give what they need.
As I was doing research, it kind of dawned on me that you've been a part of some pretty historic races.
Mm-hmm.
And you were in the pits for the 1979 Daytona 500
Yeah.
with working for one of the principals in that very famous incident on the backstretch. What do you remember about that day?
Well, remember we had had the big snow up and down the East Coast, which didn't affect us directly, the snow part of it, but the rain that came along with it had really made the racetrack and around the surrounding areas difficult, challenging, because we didn't have the jet dryers that we do today. And NASCAR did a pretty dang good job of getting ready to go, because you had CBS sitting there kind of pushing, let's go. We got a live broadcast getting ready to start here, and they were under the gun. So what I remember, is we started under caution, and they finally turned them loose, and we had a good race car, and we were right to where we needed to be, and battling, with Bobby Allison and Donnie, and those two guys were battling each other pretty hard. Richard was in the mix. AJ Fort was there, even Darrell. I remember the normal cast of characters was up toward the front doing their thing. But what happened was they went off into one, and I think it was Bobby got loose right in front of Donnie, and then Donnie got into him, and we were right in behind it. But everybody spun. Not a lot of hard contact between the cars or the wall, but they spun down to the inside of the apron and got off the racetrack.
Yeah, that wet grass.
There wasn't much grass. There was a lot of water. But everything was muddy down there, and I never will forget Cale radioing saying, I need help. I need help. What? Couldn't figure out what kind of help you needed. And we didn't have televisions inside the pit areas at that time. We were having to listen to the speakers from the track broadcast that was going on, and we were able to also talk to some of the MRN reporters of the day. But long story short, Cale got stuck, and they didn't throw the red flag. Excuse me. Back then, they just kept running. They just avoid all the rescue equipment, and that was a big thing then. So finally got a record to him and got him out of the mud. Well, we'd lost several laps because of that. And he came in, and I never forget, Junior saying, get everything out, money. So we jacked the car up, and in between, each lap around, we kept pulling stuff out and straightening the front of the fenders back out. Come to find out, we weren't really hurt bad at all, but we had lost the laps. And as I said earlier, we had a fast race car. So what did we wind up doing? We raced our way back up and got ourselves in basically second place in behind the leader, which turned out to be Donnie Allison. Well, fortunately for us, they had several caution flags. Well, every time caution come out, we had to race the leader back to the start-finish line to get your lap back. He kept doing it. Same place, same move every time. And to Donnie's credit, I think he challenged Cale the first couple of times, very little, because, still got him down, 2 laps at that time. I think we were 3 laps down. He unlapped himself, and then same thing again, unlapped himself. The next thing you know, caution comes out, and this time Donnie races Cale kind of hard, but Cale still got around him, got back on the lead lap. Game was on. Everybody knew that these two guys had the fastest race cars. We could easily separate ourselves from Richard Petty, AJ Fort, Darrell Waltrip at the time. And, we're racing, and everybody, it was kind of like, it was a given. We're getting ready to win the Daytona 500. That's what I'm sitting there thinking. And at an early age, I got a really hard lesson. That just because you see them go across start-finish line and they're in the right position, you don't know what's going to happen. And I distinctly remember Cale in perfect position on Donnie when they did cross the start-finish line. And we could hear the call being made by the track announcer. Cale and Donnie battling down in turn 1. Cale's right on his back bumper. He gives him a little bit of room as they go through turn 2. Coming off of turn 2, Cale Yarborough makes his move to the inside. Yeah. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, deja vu. This is going to be the 4th time today that he's going to put it on Donnie. And I do remember, there's contact. There's contact between the 11 and the 1. Allison and Yarborough are hard at it, beating and banging, going down the back straightaway. They get into 3, and I remember I heard them say, "Yeah," and they're around. They're in the wall. I mean, we couldn't see none of it, but we could hear every bit of it. And I'm looking at Junior, and I'm looking at everybody else around there. I mean, it's like, what's going on? You know, what's going on? But he never come back. Here come Richard off of 4 with AJ in tow, along with Darrell, and they made a gesture, but no really challenge to him, and so he wins the race. And same thing as before, they're talking about Richard Petty, and it may have been after Richard and him had come by and came down pit road, whatever reason, track announcer. And they're fighting on the back straight and down in the infield or whatever. It's like, what?
Yeah.
So another lesson in life with Junior Johnson. Junior hadn't said anything. And he kind of like everybody else, he kind of looked up at the announcers, the speaker. Henry Benfield, Charlie Reed, there was one other guy, took off running toward turn 4. And I started to go, and I remember for whatever reason, I said, wait a minute.
That's a long way.
It was more importantly, what's Junior doing? Yeah. And Junior took his radio off and went over and put it back in the little container box and started picking the rest of the stuff up in the pits.
Junior did?
Junior did.
Wow.
And I started doing the same thing. I picked our stuff up just like, we do on any other Sunday, and started loading our stuff up. There's nothing I can do. It's over. It's done. And I remember going in the garage area, and automatically, you're hearing and seeing who wrecked who did what. Didn't have a clue. Cale finally came, to the hauler. Drivers back then, they didn't have motor homes to go hide in or anything like that, so everything came to the hauler. And we were on the back of the truck when he came in there and basically said, that SOB wrecked me. And then the other SOB come over and run his mouth. And, so it wasn't any, I didn't know a whole lot more then until really the next day with all the writers and able to do that and able to go back and finally, even CBS didn't have instant replay like they do today. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't go to a sports network and expect to see. Only time you saw anything was the highlights that were on the local news or your area which you were in. So a lot of unanswered questions went on all the way really to Rockingham the next week. And couldn't believe that they both wrecked again at the start of the race. And one was on the pole, one was on the outside pole, and here we go again. But it was never – there was always a difference of opinion and a difference of the view that you were – which windshield you were looking out of. Yeah. And to this day, I've never felt like that Donnie Allison did anything wrong, and I didn't think Cale did anything wrong. It was just one of those hard racing situations that ended up with a bad result that wound up being a great thing for our sport. Yeah. Subsequently, the fight and everything like that. I mean, it showed the passion and the fact that no nonsense that these guys will not put up with. And, a lot of people ask you about it. What was it like to be there? It was surreal. It really was, because there was like an unusual calmness, yet unbelievable attitude of what had just occurred. And I just think it was funny to see Junior and Hoss Ellington, talking about it from their viewpoints. And to this day, I mean, I think that I hate using it this kind of cliche, but it was kind of cool to be a part of. I mean, when history was made, it was just wow. I mean, and you don't understand the magnitude of what went on that day until you've been in the sport as long as I have. And I know you, from your vantage point, you understand what I'm getting ready to say. What does everybody always show about Daytona? You always get a glimpse. I mean, it's been less and less, but everybody goes back to that point in history at Daytona, and they highlight that because that was the day that NASCAR, in my opinion, was really discovered, because the whole country had an opportunity to see what we had already knew was going on, which was this animal is growing. This monster is getting ready to get bigger. And it did. I mean, it kept making more strides forward each and every day from that point in 1979. We had superstars, and we had a sport that was worth viewing and supporting and being a fan of from that day on.
You mentioned earlier the fact that when you won your first championship, you wanted to win another one, and you did, and you won 3 in a row. Mm-hmm. But in 1979, that was the year that Cale's streak was broken, and while it would have been a good season for most, it wasn't quite the same as it had been it wasn't quite the same in 1979 as it had been in the previous years. Was there a danger of maybe being, I don't want to say too successful, but if you win 3 championships in a row, anything else is going to be a disappointment?
Yes, and yes again, because that's the way the time in my period of my career in my life, that's what you're expected to do. I mean, I think that, when you look at all major sports, you got these super teams. You got these moments in history where you can't beat the New York Yankees. You can't overcome the Boston Celtics or the LA Lakers. They were just like super teams, or the Green Bay Packers. You have that dynasty, that legacy. And I think it was the beginning of what could have been for even a guy like Junior Johnson. If he just started showing that when Junior Johnson put the right people in his vehicle, in his car, and they did the right things together, they're pretty unstoppable. And he hadn't been able to do that until he got Cale in there. And Cale really had an opportunity to run all the races, and Junior had everything that he needed to put it all together. Always a factor at certain races back even, when he basically made his return to racing. When I say that, with the Chevrolet Monte Carlo in the early 70s with Charlie Glotz back at Charlotte. But Junior was getting better and better and better, and he was getting, a shot in the arm from Chevrolet. I think that was kind of like the beginning. And Junior, I think, got tired of Richard Petty and David Pearson winning championships and him not being able to claim fame to that. I think that he wanted to join the ranks of the Pettys and Bud Moore, because he made a commitment to do that. 79 was a reality check, I think, for all of us, because it's almost like Cale made it look easy. Winning 9-10 races. I mean, I know that, winning a large number of races is not unheard of in our sport, because Richard did it a lot. But Richard was in a different league because he ran all the races, anything that they had. And a lot of people they didn't have the taste for it or the stomach to be able to try to do it all. And he knew how to take and maximize his resources and turn them into championships. But I think the other thing is that winning championships and winning races was just starting to become more of a value. You could actually run with a decent sponsor and make money. And not make money, make good money. And I think that was the motivating part of Junior's commitment to run like he did and coming up with parts and pieces that could withstand it. I mean, that was the other thing that we had the advantage on. Because when you go back and you read, a lot of times it wasn't people crashing as much as it was they couldn't complete what they started.
Yeah.
And we built I know Junior always used to harp on us. Make sure we don't have mechanical failure, whether with hubs, with brakes, engines, transmissions, the vehicle themselves. Don't make something lighter that's going to break. Make it durable. I mean, a lot of times that's the reason why we did so well is our stuff completed 500 miles, 600 miles, 500 laps at Bristol. We just wore people down. Having laps on the field for Junior Johnson and Cale Yarborough and even Darrell Waltrip was not unheard of.
Yeah.
And it was against better equipment than it's ever been in the sports history at that time. But still, the way that we went at it, we turned more RPM. We did a lot of things that nobody else could do. And that was because Junior was an innovator, and he was able to figure things out, I think, at that time better than anybody else. We didn't have the ability to put an engine on dyno and run it 24/7 to see what part failed whenever we failed it. We wouldn't take something to failure. Didn't have the time or the resources. But Junior did enough of it, and he knew what he was looking for, that we came up with cranks that didn't break, harmonic balancers that didn't, come apart. The little things that a lot of times put people out of business during the course of a race. I mean, I'm just looking through the Grand National scene of yesteryear, and you see all the part failures that put people behind the wall.
Yeah,
we didn't have that problem. Just didn't have that problem. And not to say it was 100% bulletproof, but it was dang close.
At what point did you find out that Cale was going to be leaving?
He came to us, I guess, right around Charlotte race of 80. And I remember when we found out about it, we were battling still for a championship, and Junior wasn't real happy about it. And
he wasn't happy
that Cale was going to leave.
Okay.
We were, like I say, we're battling for a championship. And I'm not 100% sure how many races there were left when it came out at that time. But I do distinctly remember we knew that Cale was going to go and join MC Anderson. They were going to run a limited schedule. Benny Parsons was driving for MC Anderson at the time. Junior knew Benny. Benny was from Wilkes County. And so, little known fact, Junior wanted to get rid of Cale then. All right, he wants to go?
See ya.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
And if I'm correct, Benny was still in contention for a championship also with the number of races we had left. And Junior said, hell, I'll take Benny, y'all take Cale, and we'll try to win the championship. And this is, like I say, it hurt Junior's feelings.
Yeah.
So understand what I'm getting ready to say was more out of couldn't believe he was doing it after all of what I've done for you type attitude. And that was, I don't want to help you win another championship. I'm not going to quit. I still want to win. But in winning, I may get you a championship. And then you're going to take it down to Savannah, Georgia? I don't think so. So he was more motivated to try to help Benny do it. He'd get behind that and rather than helping Cale do it. So, I mean, we were not quite as sharp at the end of 1980 as we should have been because I just don't think the Junior really wanted him to win a championship.
And Dale tried his best to give away the championship at Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
And you doggone came close to it anyway.
Yeah, we came close to it anyway, but it just didn't work out. And that closed the chapter of Junior Johnson and Cale Yarborough.